Marc Chagall is a very difficult artist to kind of place in an ism. His work is very, very distinctive. He had a number of influences. He was living at a really unique time in history in Paris. He had a nice long life, and so there's many influences in his art. So he's not easily categorized. Uh, Quote, art to me is a state of soul more than anything else. And so I'm going to tell you about Marc Chagall. So some have classified him as School of Paris. He's with Modigliani, a few others. But again, it basically is this unique time in art history. And it's the early part of the 1900s. There is a lot of modernism happening, a lot of new ideas circulating. And of course, it's also a lot happening in literature and other things as well. It shows abstraction and cubist influence, imaginative, whimsical colors and themes are certainly part of Chagall's oeuvre or signature style. Some say oeuvre if you want to kind of Americanize it. Floating houses, green faces, upside down people. These are kind of signature in his works. These are one of the ways in which I readily recognize his work. Even if I'm looking at a work I haven't ever seen before, sometimes if I pay attention to those things, it's recognizable. His works are often about memory, Russian folklore, and there's a number of works that also include the Eiffel Tower. He lived in Paris for a long time. He became a French citizen, changed the spelling of his name, and to appear more French, and certainly a very, very compelling and interesting artist with an interesting life. This is called I in the Village, also known as Me in My Village, and this is perhaps his most famous work. This is the one I would say that shows up in a number of art history textbooks. So, you know, Chagall is not usually given a great deal of time in these textbooks, but if they show anything, they usually show this one in Green Violinist. And I don't think he can be described in just 2 slides. So we're going to give him a little bit more depth. Rural childhood, not wealthy, dreamlike representation of goats, a farmer, violinist, houses, things are upside down, sideways, a jigsaw puzzle extracted from a child's imagination. Do you see vestiges of cubism here? Absolutely. And so there are definitely influences of that. Intrigue, symbolism, green-faced man wearing a cross around his neck, a cap on his head, and holding a glowing tree stares at a goat. In the background, a row of houses, an Orthodox church, a man dressed in black, carrying a scythe, was just sometimes an image of death, but here I don't think so. I think it's if anything, more of an image of work and life, everyday life. Hurries past an upside-down woman playing what appears to be a violin. Violin and fiddlers are often in his work, and again, I think his work is largely about memory. So he was born in a small Jewish Hasidic community in Vitebsk, Belarus. His father was a fishmonger. His mother ran a small sundry shop. As a child, Chagall attended the Jewish elementary school. He studied Hebrew and the Bible, and these influences show up in his work throughout his life before attending the Russian public school. And then he started to learn the fundamentals of drawing. Russian-born lithographer, etcher, designer, spent a large part of his life in France, also lived in U.S., taught by a local painter, 1907 to 10, goes to Imperial School for the Protection of the Fine Arts, lived in Paris, 1910 to 1914, again, kind of pivotal, important years where he met Apollinaire, the poet, Delaunay, Léger, Modigliani, the artist. He was moving in interesting circles. He had his first one-man show in 1914. This is his self-portrait with 7 fingers. I think that's true. I don't think artists have enough fingers. We need a couple extra would certainly be helpful, especially when we're trying to hold a lot of different things. Uh, he was born Moishe Chagall, 1887, and died in 1985. So he was getting really close to that 100 mark. So Russian, French, Jewish artist, and again, he also lived in the U.S. in the 40s. And then here are a number of examples of his signature, which again has some differences. Different parts of our life, have you noticed that our signatures do change? At least mine has. When I was younger, it was pretty meticulous. Now it's much quicker. Fiddler, 1913. Green violinist, 1920s. Why the green faces? Well, green is a symbol of life. It's a symbol of energy. It's a symbol of, often a symbol of fertility in Egyptian art, for instance. But I also think it's whimsical, it's fun, it's different, and he's probably also influenced by the Fauves, which were playing with color, bright, imaginative color. So a lot of reasons. So music, poetry, and art go together for Chagall. He had a poetry book published posthumously that was actually written by his wife, Bella. She was a poet. And so this was a replica of a mural he did for the Moscow Theater that was an allegorical symbol of music. So another reason for perhaps the whimsical color. Family pretty poor at this time, and he was deeply depressed. And again, I think the imagery of the violinists might have been comforting. Again, why green? Avant-garde, interest in new art movements, modernity. He refused literal interpretations. This is from the Guggenheim. So again, in art history in general, life, vegetative, growth, fertility, it's nostalgic, reflects back maybe to village life, the countryside. It could be a number of things. And I think that's part of what makes him interesting. So this is an Egyptian mummiform sarcophagi example. Osiris is often shown with a green face, sometimes the whole body. God of the dead, resurrection, husband, brother of Isis. Don't think about it too much. It's complicated. Like a lot of mythology, father, daughter, sister, husband, all this gets convoluted. It's like it's a little bit like a soap opera. So Chagall's 1910s fiddlers. So he returns to the theme a number of times. There's not just one. The wedding with fiddler. Again, it would have just simply been a part of everyday life. And so again, the imagery is really quite beautiful. So an earlier version almost looks as though another artist painted it. The Chabad Hasidim of Chagall's childhood believed it possible to achieve communion with God through music and dance, and the fiddler was a vital presence in ceremonies and festivals. So over and over and over again, we see this symbol. And I think the woman with the kind of sheer blouse with the revealing breast is interesting as well in this particular example. Violinists in this time were primarily traveling musicians. That's suggested by the curving road. His arm mimics the curve of the road. I think that's interesting, and had I not read that on a LACMA website, I don't think I would have caught it right away. But I think that's interesting how his arm literally is parallel to the road, as if he's almost part of the road. So complementary colors of red and green also make it very, very visually appealing. And simplified forms. It definitely has a folk art quality to it. 1909, this is Russian wedding. This is more representational, painted a little bit more traditionally. And so this, again, 1909, he's not really developed his style, his signature style. Only 2 years later, Wedding with Fiddler, 1920. Weddings are also a common theme in his work. So after Chagall moves from Paris to Russia in 1910, his paintings quickly become part of the latest avant-garde styles. In Paris Through a Window, his debt to Orphic Cubism is from his influence of Robert and Sonia Delaunay. Robert and Sonia Delaunay were working in bright, vivid colors and lots of cubist qualities too, as well. Overlapping planes of vivid color in the sky above the Eiffel Tower, which shows up repeatedly in his work, also as part of the cityscape and was a frequent subject in Delaunay's work. Delaunay was 4 years old when the Eiffel Tower was erected in Paris in the public green space known as the Champ de Mars. One of the many artists to depict this landmark, Delaunay also did an example of these Eiffel Tower paintings. So this is Red Tower in 1911. And he returns to the theme more than 30 times. Partly, there's a market for it. It's certainly a popular theme in my house. I have a few paintings that have Eiffel Towers in them. In fact, I just bought a paint by number. It's more of an adult paint by number set that's an Eiffel Tower, so that when I'm painting and my husband actually wants to hang out in the studio / study, he can sit there and paint as well. So we'll see if he gets it done. In any case, so he returned to this theme a number of times. It was built for the Exposition Universelle. So Orphic Cubism defined. The poet Guillaume Apollinaire applied the French term Orphism to the visionary and lyrical paintings of Delaunay, relating them to Orpheus, a poet and musician in Greek mythology. And then this also shows you Delaunay's circular forms. So now, this has some interesting details, which I didn't really talk about when I showed the slide previously. It also shows Janus, who's the goddess, the god of beginnings, gates, transitions, dualities, endings. He's sometimes depicted as having two faces, the future and the past. He's part of a Greco-Roman tradition. The parachutist may refer to contemporary experience. The first successful jump was in 1912, so it's right in the framework of time where he's working. So it makes sense that that shows up there. Other motifs suggest his hometown. This painting is an enlarged version of a window view in a self-portrait painted 1 year earlier, in which he contrasts his birthplace with Paris. And I think there's this kind of dual nature as well to his work at this point. It's transitional. And I think the Janus figure also really works well as the artist as having two parts to himself, the French Chagall and the Jewish Chagall, the Russian Chagall. So do I think that's possible? Yes, very much so. So definitely also would have been exposed to Cubism as well in this time period, and so I think that's also an influence. This is also one of his more famous works. So as Paris in this time was an amazing place to be. There was a lot happening in literature, in art, and certainly in society, in this cafe society. And so this these new ideas and this exchange of new ideas, and the personified cat, I think, is interesting in this work as well. The cat definitely has a human face, not so much a feline face as well. They were settling in this vibrant area of Montparnasse, also Montmartre, And again, this would have been an interesting place for them to socialize. And by them, I mean mostly males. You mostly have the males, of course, in these bars and night cafes. Ladies, not so much. So some of the female artists didn't get those same exposures. Paris, city for lovers and dreamers, then and now, has been an inspiration for artists for centuries, and certainly Chagall has added to this romantic quality. Is there a romantic quality to Chagall's work? Absolutely, very much so. A portrait by Yehuda Penn, 1914. He was his teacher. So again, Russian, born in Belarus, 7-decade career, very impressive. And Cubism, Fauvism, symbolism, folk art. There's a lot of different styles. A very lyrical, figurative style to his works. Very multifaceted, gifted artist. He also did stained glass. He believed that music and art were closely interrelated. You could connect him to artists like Vasily Kandinsky, the Russian expressionist, who believed that as well. He also did work in the theater, which is not always very well known. However, if you saw the Chagall exhibition at the LACMA a few years ago, then you saw a number of examples. It was one cool exhibition, one of the best I've seen at the LACMA. And so Daphne and Chloe, some of the costumes were actually hand painted while the person was wearing the material, so that the artist could see how the fabric moved and the placement of everything. Queen of the Night. I thought this was one of the more striking images. She's very tall, very imposing. And so, again, this was the Chagall exhibition 2017, 2018. Only opera for which Chagall ever designed sets and costume, Mozart's The Magic Flute, presented by the Met Opera in 1967. And so here are some examples. They're very playful, very fun, very whimsical. He worked on a number of materials. He also worked in gouache. Gouache is Chinese chalk and watercolor. It's a little more full-bodied than watercolor, a little more control. Give me a choice of gouache or watercolor, I'll choose gouache. That's my personal preference. It's not nearly so loose. More of a matte finish than watercolor, less transparent. You could wonder for hours what flowers means, but for me, they're life itself in all its happy brilliance. We couldn't do without flowers. Flowers help you forget life's tragedies, and he did have some. Here's one of the costume for Daphne and Chloe, the god Pan, 1959. Knit, animal fur, leather, silk, foliage, fake hair. These were just absolutely fascinating when you saw them. It was such an imaginative, well-organized exhibition, a mixture of paintings and theater and drawings and mythology and folk art. It just was wonderful. So love and fantasy go hand in hand. Now, the god Pan ruled over the shepherds and was wild, often chasing nymphs, and he's from mythology. I saw this sculpture in Athens, and it's wonderful. It's at the Archaeological Museum in Athens, and it's one of the last works you see as you leave the museum. And it's so playful, it's fun. She's on this plinth, and she's holding her sandal, and Cupid is kind of teasing and tweaking Pan. And Pan is animalistic, very sexualized. And so Aphrodite holds her left hand in front of her modestly, trying to cover, protect her palm from the indiscreet intentions of Pan, while she brandishes her sandal in her raised hand to deter him. And yet she looks very, very playful. She doesn't look like she's seriously going to keep him away, which I think is interesting. It's definitely more playful than a strong rebuke. Chagall's 1908 Red Nude Sitting. This is a little different than a lot of his works. And again, this is one I might not recognize. This one almost looks sculptural to me. I can see a little bit of perhaps Modigliani's influence here. Emotional, poetic, mixes styles. Again, has a fantasy quality. His works are typically happy themes. He saw his work as not the dream of one people, but all humanity. In the arts, as in life, everything is possible provided it's based on love. So, quite a believer in. And Bella perhaps was the most important thing in Chagall's life. Bella was a much beloved wife who unfortunately passed away in her 40s. Over his career, Chagall declined to join an art movement. In Paris, he refused to align with the Cubists. He refused to participate with the Surrealists. His choice was to distance himself from classification. So again, I think that's largely why we get Paris School or School of Paris. And this is Chagall with Bella and his daughter Ida. The Birthday, 1910s. I think this is my favorite of his works. It's whimsical, it's fun, it's playful, shows that great joy of early love. And here he's shown again, literally head over heels with Bella. Bella was very good to him. He would be in his studio and she'd bring him treats and bake for him. I love the mixture of textiles in this work. I think it's really interesting. The details are very, very fun. So again, she unfortunately lived from 1895 to 1944. So again, she wasn't that old when she passed away. There are few more vivid evocations of how it feels to fall in love. Again, I think you certainly see that in his work. And over and over and over again, he turns to Bella, really throughout his life. Even after he fell in love with another woman, Bella still crops up. So just absolutely gorgeous. And so this is a detail of one of his works. Drawing of Bella, 1910s. Bella with white collar. So you can actually see the drawing, photograph, and then the painting, which is one thing I like about this slide. You can see again the different ways in which he saw Bella. His family was working class and he was the oldest of 9 children. Her father was a jeweler and they had higher hopes for their daughter. After the baby Ida was born, 9 months after the wedding, that considerably helped his relationship with his in-laws. She was the 8th child. The family was quite wealthy. Bella met the young artist Moishe Chagall at a party at her friend's. Thoughtful, constantly immersed in the painting, which he considered his life's work. He was really recognized by no one. He was poor, but she saw something in him and definitely believed in him. So she was a talented writer herself. And again, her book of poetry was published posthumously after she passed away. When you did catch a glimpse of his eyes, they were as blue as if they'd fallen straight out of the sky. They were strange eyes, long, almond-shaped, and each seemed to sail along by itself like a little boat. But I thought that was a rather lovely description in her words. Early 1920s. Bella in green dress. They married 6 years after they met. Her silence is mine, her eyes mine. I feel she has known me always, my childhood, my present life, my future. I know this is she, my wife, her pale coloring, her eyes. How big and round and black they are. They are my eyes, my soul. And this is also in his words from his book, My Life. In the mornings and the evenings, she'd bring to my studio cakes she had baked with loving care, fried fish, boiled milk, colorful fabrics, and again, those colored fabrics and textiles you see in his work, and even wood for me to use as an easel. All I had to do was open my window and in stream the blueness of the sky, love and flowers with her. Dressed all in white or all in black, she's been haunting my paintings, the great central image of my art. And so she does show up over and over and over. More vintage photographs. The promenade. Here we have those floating people again. He's kind of flying her like she's a kite, 1918. During his time, he was the foremost Jewish artist in the world and has since been referred to as the quintessential Jewish artist of the 20th century. But I don't know that he's as well known as many other artists. In fact, I think he gets sadly overlooked sometimes. He's certainly very well known for his brilliant use of color, his whimsy. His artworks are lively, imaginative, cubism, fauvism, folk style. I think you see all of it in his works. Memory of a Spring and Memory of Paris. So back in Moscow, he slipped from one precarious commission to another. In Vitebsk, synagogues were closed. The secret police raided Bella's family jewelry shop. At her prodding, the couple joined Russia's cultural exodus to Berlin and then to Paris. He left Russia in 1922, never to return, except through his memories, through his painting. His work often feels like you're reading a diary. I think very much so. A lot of them remind me of drawings in diaries. Rather famous photo of him with his wife, Bella. So, beautiful colorist. I think that's what I like about his work most of all, is just the beautiful colors. And it's very, very active. You don't find a lot of empty space in a Chagall. What is artistic success? He rose from obscurity as a Jewish man in Tsarist Russia to become a multimillionaire and a global art celebrity. So he certainly was famous in his life. He was a young star wherever art was hot. Paris in 1911-12, revolutionary Russia, early 1920s Berlin, when Berlin was certainly an art center. Popular taste canonized him in old age as a founder with Henri Matisse and Pablo Picasso. And yet I think Matisse and Picasso people more readily know their names than they do Chagall's. Patrons for his big public commissions included the Catholic Church, the Israeli state, the Rockefellers, the Paris Opera, and the United Nations. By mid-1920s, he was pretty successful, but before that, pretty poor. Chagall absorbed Cubism, Fauvism, Surrealism, Expressionism, but again, he still has his own style. And so, again, I think he can't, I agree with this particular article that he is not easily pigeonholed. Lovers of Venice, where Venice is where he also spent some time. The colors in this are really quite beautiful. And of course, you see a bride and a groom. So again, you see that green face associated with, I think, his rural Russian background, and certainly I think fertility as part of this as well, and it's just so lively and beautiful. Bride with a Fan, 1911. I think this is a little bit different. To me, this looks a little bit more sad, all the grays and the blues. But so this is different than his normal style. More often, you definitely see bright colors, Brighter colors show through the white paint suggest he reused an old canvas. Matisse, the son of artist, Pierre Matisse, the son of artist Henri Matisse, coveted the works of Chagall since 1924 when he first met the artist in Paris. Chagall was loath to part with this work, but in 1941, Pierre Matisse, who then owned an art gallery, set up an exhibition for Chagall that became an important blockbuster. But brides definitely preoccupied Chagall through much of his life. He returned to the motif over and over and over again. Some of them look more happy than others. Some of them have a kind of dark quality to them. This is Matrimony or Marriage, 1918. The angel is very vivid and bright, and the contrast between the monochromatic grays and blacks is intriguing. And it looks like Bella and, of course, himself. Bride with Two Faces. And the breasts are revealed. This is in a private collection. Bride and Groom with Eiffel Tower, 1939. He said he was a dreamer who never woke up. Some art historians have sought to decrypt his symbols, but there's no consensus on what they mean. We cannot interpret them because they are simply part of his world, like figures from a dream. And this is Jean-Michel Fauré, director of the Marc Chagall Museum in Nice. So the rooster may be a symbol of fertility, a memory, but it's definitely a recurring theme. Detail of bride and groom on Eiffel Tower. Bride and Groom on Cock, 1939 to 1947. Yes, I would think that's a pretty intentional pun there as well, so it's playful. In our life, there is simple color as on an artist's palette which provides the meaning of life and art. It is the color of love. The chuppah is a tapestry attached to the top of 4 poles. It means covering or protection, and it's intended as a roof or covering for the bride and groom in a Jewish wedding. So it's a sacred space. Bridal couples under a canopy. Again, it also symbolizes the home that the couple will make together. Again, they're floating in this one as well. Then you also have the symbol of the menorah, and you have the goats, and you have the violinist, and you have flowers. So after Bella passed away, he paints this wedding that is darker in its approach. It's called Wedding, 1944. And again, the figures are more to the bottom, more compact, and again, it doesn't have quite as happy of a feel. And for a while after death, he did not paint at all. He shows the image of Bella's brother Aaron, but there is a sinister melancholy. Angel musicians may be playing a death march as a wedding dance. Private grief added to world events were also centered on the death of Bella as well. Bride and Groom with Red Canopy. Midsummer's Dream, and here you have the goat as a groom. Yet he has a hand, so it's a personified animal. This actually works really well with some of his theatrical themes as well. Bella with the Book, 3 candles, but really, really whimsical and fun and lighthearted. Why not? Wedding candles. And so this painting can certainly be read differently after her death, knowing that her death was there. In fact, she's kind of almost laying in the foreground, almost as a death symbol or a memory. Again, you can certainly read it different ways. There is definitely a mythology to some of his works. Airborne humans, monster, animals. Um, Again, this really, I mean, here we have a flying fish. Like fairy tales, images all put together float through our intellectual thinking and our very essence as humans. We somehow clearly understand his message. I don't know that I clearly understand his message, but I know I try. I think his work, it has a great deal of charm to it. His daughter Ida, she actually introduced 30-year-old Virginia to Chagall, 58. She was married and became his housekeeper. She became his lover and had his child David in 1946. She was with him for 7 years and ultimately left her husband, but she could not compete with Bella's memory. And he was not married to Virginia. He briefly married a second wife. Uh, and then his third wife's name was Valentina Brodsky. She was also known as Vava. She came from millionaire sugar growers. By all accounts, they were quite happy. She cooked him Russian meals as well. So here's a picture of Vava. So the body language is certainly playful and fun. Chagall's wife, Valentina, Vava, speaks to him in Russian, takes her hand and presses it to him. I love my wife very much, you know. And all at once, his piercing gaze softens to that of a contented child. And this was from an Architectural Digest interview when he was 97. And this is for Vava, 1955. 1955, Vava by Chagall. And then Chagall's studio in the south of France. Very kind of nicely arranged. Bride and Groom, 1976, and then Chagall's Bouquet, 1982. Flowers definitely are a recurring theme. So the 20s were in Berlin, 1923 to 1940 in Paris, except for visits to Egypt, Palestine, Holland, Spain, Portugal, Italy. So he really had quite the international experience as an artist. In the US as a refugee, 1941 to 47. Then he goes back to France. His later works include a new ceiling painting for the Paris Opera, and also a number of commissions for stained glass, and lived in St. Paul de Vence. And here are some examples of his gorgeous stained glass. Well, also, I think I have some good clips on his stained glass as well. So, in any case, he said he loved the feeling of youth in America, but some of his finest stained glass is the Blue Series, commissioned for All Saints Church in Kent. As far as the marketplace, he does quite well. This is Bestiary of Music, Bestiary, a book of real, fabulous, unique, whimsical animals, and it's sold to an Asian buyer after heated competition for over $4 million. It set a new record as the most expensive painter by a modern Western artist ever sold at auction in Asia. Of course, those numbers are changing all the time because the Asian art market's kind of going crazy. One likes France but falls in love with Italy. France was more important to his art. He once said how he'd grown to dislike the dark and sludgy color of Russia, like its footwear. Italy, of course, is known for its footwear. France gave him bright yellows, reds, and other strong tones. In the South, he met Picasso for lunch. And there's a few pictures of them together. The occasion had been anxiously planned, but Picasso was tiresome. He could be. He kept asking Chagall why he never went back to his native Soviet Union. Perhaps there was no money there, Picasso said. Chagall had fled Stalin and the persecution of his fellow Jews. He never bothered to see Picasso again. Didn't help that he made statements like this either. What a genius Picasso is. It's a pity he cannot paint. Here's a picture of Chagall. He's an older man. Again, fanciful images of blue cows, flying lovers, biblical prophets, green-faced fiddlers. He knew his style, he knew who he was, but he also guarded his privacy carefully. When people approached to ask if he was that famous painter Marc Chagall, he'd say no, or more absurdly, I don't think so, or point to someone else and say maybe that's him. Yes, he could be entertaining as well. He died in St. Paul de Vence in 1985, 97, still working. Avant-gardist who refused to be modern, very, very sure of his own distinct style. He wanted to stay wild, untamed, to shout, weep, pray. And Lovers, 1928, sold for $28.5 million. Wow. And then the Chagall greeting card is shown in the bottom. Only love interests me, and I'm only in contact with things that revolve around love. If I create from the heart, nearly everything works. If I create from the head, almost nothing. Pretty lovely quote. And there are worse things to inspire you. I think love is certainly noble.